the quiet hours before dawn breaks over medieval Europe, when the morning mist still clings to cobblestone streets and thatched roofs, a solitary figure makes their way through the sleeping village. Their footsteps are soft against the stones, careful not to wake the households that will soon become their audience. Tonight, we journey together into the gentle world of medieval entertainers, those wandering souls who carry joy from village to village, castle to castle, across the vast tapestry of the Middle Ages. These were the minstrels and troubadours, the jesters and storytellers, the acrobats and musicians, who brought light to an often harsh world. Our story unfolds slowly, like the turning of ancient pages. We'll walk with these travelers through centuries of tradition, discovering the quiet rhythms of their lives, the simple beauty of their craft, and the profound impact they had on medieval society. So settle in comfortably. Let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift back through time to an era where entertainment was intimate, personal, and carried on the voices of those who chose the open road as their stage. The tradition of wandering entertainers did not appear suddenly in medieval Europe. Like water finding its course through ancient riverbeds, these performers followed paths carved by earlier travelers. Roman actors, Celtic bards, and Germanic singers who had moved across the continent for generations before. As the Roman Empire slowly transformed in the 4th and 5th centuries, its grand theaters and amphitheaters began to empty. The formal structures of classical entertainment gave way to something more intimate, more personal. Performers who had once commanded vast audiences now found themselves telling stories around hearth fires, singing for their supper in tavern common rooms. These early medieval entertainers were often viewed with a mixture of welcome and suspicion. The church, establishing its growing influence, regarded theatrical performances with caution. Yet people's need for story, for music, for laughter, these needs ran deeper than any official doctrine. By the 6th and 7th centuries, a new pattern emerged. Entertainers began to move in seasonal cycles, following the rhythm of agricultural life. They would arrive for harvest festivals, wedding celebrations, religious holidays, times when communities had both leisure and coin to spare for entertainment. The earliest of these wandering performers often traveled alone or in very small groups. A single minstrel with a lute and a collection of songs could provide an entire evening's entertainment. They carried their repertoire in memory, stories and melodies passed down through informal apprenticeships and chance encounters on the road. These solo performers developed remarkable memories. A skilled minstrel might know hundreds of songs, dozens of long narrative poems, countless jokes and riddles. They were living libraries of entertainment, carrying culture from place to place in an age when written books were rare and precious. As trade routes expanded in the 8th and 9th centuries, so too did the networks of traveling entertainers. They began to follow merchant caravans, timing their journeys to coincide with market days and trade fairs. Where commerce gathered people together, entertainment naturally followed. The relationship between entertainer and audience in these early centuries was remarkably intimate. Unlike the distant grandeur of Roman spectacles, medieval entertainment happened within touching distance. Performers could see individual faces in their audience, respond to specific reactions, and adjust their performance to the mood of the room. This intimacy shaped the very nature of medieval entertainment. Stories were told in conversational tones. Songs were sung at volumes that invited participation, and the boundary between performer and audience often blurred as listeners joined in choruses or called out responses to familiar tales. The word minstrel comes from the Latin ministerialis, meaning servant or attendant. This etymology reveals something essential about these performers. They saw themselves as servants to the art of entertainment, devoted to bringing joy and wonder to others. A minstrel's education began early and never truly ended. Young apprentices would attach themselves to experienced performers, learning through observation and gradual participation. They began by carrying instruments, then progressing to simple accompaniment, and finally to full performance. The minstrel's repertoire was vast and varied. They needed to know romantic ballads for noble courts, bawdy songs for tavern crowds, sacred hymns for religious occasions, and work songs that helped laborers keep rhythm. Each audience required a different musical language. Memory techniques were crucial to a minstrel's success. They developed elaborate mental filing systems, associating songs with visual images, organizing their repertoire by season, occasion, or audience type. A skilled minstrel could navigate thousands of songs as easily as a scholar might navigate a well-organized library. The lute became the minstrel's most iconic instrument, and for good reason. Its moderate size made it portable. Its range of notes allowed for both melody and simple harmony, and its relative quietness suited the intimate venues where most performances took place. Learning to play the lute required years of patient practice. Young minstrels would spend countless hours developing the finger strength and dexterity needed to fret notes cleanly and pick strings with precision. The calluses on a minstrel's fingertips were marks of their dedication to their craft, but minstrels were more than musicians. They were storytellers, comedians, sometimes even acrobats. A successful minstrel needed to read their audience, understanding when to shift from a melancholy ballad to a lively dance tune, when to tell a romantic story, and when to crack a joke. The life of a traveling minstrel was often lonely. Days spent walking between towns, nights sleeping in unfamiliar places, constantly adapting to new audiences and venues. Yet many chose this path for the freedom it offered. Freedom from feudal obligations, from agricultural schedules, from the rigid hierarchies that defined most medieval lives. Minstrels developed their own informal networks of communication. They would leave messages for other performers at inns and monasteries, sharing information about generous patrons, hostile territories, or seasonal opportunities. These networks created a kind of invisible community spanning all of medieval Europe. The relationship between minstrel and patron was complex and varied. Some minstrels found steady employment with noble households, becoming familiar fixtures in castle life. Others preferred the independence of constant travel, never staying long enough to become beholden to any single lord. Seasonal patterns governed much of a minstrel's life. Winter often meant seeking shelter in larger towns or accepting temporary positions in noble households. Spring brought the renewal of travel. Summer offered the most opportunities for outdoor performances, and autumn was the time of harvest festivals and wedding celebrations. As medieval society became more sophisticated in the 11th and 12th centuries, a new class of entertainers emerged in the noble courts of southern France. These were the troubadours, poet-musicians who elevated the art of song to new heights of literary and musical complexity. The troubadours differed from common minstrels in fundamental ways. Many were themselves nobles or educated clergy, creating art for their social equals rather than performing for coin. They wrote in the elegant Occitan language, crafting lyrics of unprecedented sophistication. The subject matter of troubadour poetry centered on courtly love, an idealized, often unattainable romantic devotion. These songs spoke of noble passion, refined sentiment, and the elevation of earthly love to an almost spiritual plane. Eleanor of Aquitaine played a crucial role in spreading troubadour culture beyond its Occitan origins. When she married Henry II of England, she brought this sophisticated entertainment tradition to the English court, and it gradually spread throughout European nobility. The troubadour tradition required extensive education. These poet-musicians needed to master complex poetic forms, understand musical theory, and possess deep knowledge of classical literature and contemporary court culture. Their songs were intellectual achievements as much as entertainment. The musical settings of troubadour poetry were often surprisingly simple. Complex lyrics were paired with elegant but uncomplicated melodies, allowing the words to remain clearly audible and comprehensible. The music served the poetry, not the reverse. Troubadours created an entire culture around their art. They developed elaborate systems of patronage, complex social protocols for performances, and sophisticated critical standards for evaluating each other's work. This was entertainment raised to the level of high art. The influence of troubadour culture extended far beyond entertainment. Their celebration of courtly love helped shape European concepts of romance, chivalry, and refined behavior. The modern notion of romantic love owes much to these medieval poet-musicians. As troubadour culture spread northward, it adapted to local languages and customs. The troubadours of northern France, the minnesänger of Germany, and other regional variations each developed their own characteristics, while maintaining the essential troubadour emphasis on sophisticated poetry and music. The performance context for troubadour art was intimate and exclusive. These were not public entertainments, but private performances for small audiences of cultural sophisticates. The setting might be a castle chamber, a garden pavilion, or a noble's private apartments. The decline of troubadour culture came gradually, influenced by changing political conditions, religious pressures, and shifting literary tastes. The Albigensian Crusade in the early 13th century disrupted the Occitan courts that had nurtured this tradition, scattering its practitioners across Europe. Yet the influence of troubadour art persisted long after its original context disappeared. Its emphasis on refined sentiment, complex poetic structure, and the integration of words and music would influence European literature and music for centuries to come. Among all medieval entertainers, perhaps none were more complex in their role than the court jesters. These figures, often dismissed in popular imagination as mere comic relief, served a far more sophisticated function in medieval society. The jester's privilege to speak truth to power was one of the most remarkable institutions of medieval court life. Protected by their comic role, jesters could voice criticisms and observations that would be treasonous from anyone else's lips. This freedom came with careful boundaries. A skilled jester understood exactly how far they could push, when to retreat into pure comedy, and how to wrap serious commentary in layers of humor and metaphor that made it palatable to proud rulers. The best jesters were often highly educated individuals who chose or fell into their role for complex reasons. Some were former scholars, displaced nobles, or simply sharp-witted individuals who found that humor provided them a living and a platform for their observations. The jester's humor often relied on wordplay, irony, and sophisticated linguistic games. Medieval audiences delighted in puns, double meanings, and clever reversals of expectation. A jester needed to be as much a poet as a comedian. Physical comedy was also part of the jester's repertoire, but it was rarely crude or purely slapstick. Medieval court jesters were more likely to engage in clever pantomime, acrobatic displays that told stories, or interactive games with their audience. The relationship between jester and ruler was often surprisingly intimate. Many rulers developed genuine affection for their jesters, appreciating both their entertainment value and their unique perspective on court life and politics. Jesters served as unofficial counselors, using their privileged position to observe court dynamics and offer insights that formal advisors might miss or be reluctant to voice. Their outsider status gave them a unique vantage point on the exercise of power. The jester's costume was itself a form of communication. The motley of mixed colors and patterns suggested a person outside normal social categories, while bells and other decorative elements marked them as entertainers, and thus harmless. Some jesters developed reputations that extended far beyond their home courts. Stories of their wit and wisdom spread through the networks of traveling entertainers, and the best became legendary figures whose jokes and observations were repeated across. The tradition of the wise fool extended beyond court jesters to include other comic performers, carnival entertainers, festival fools, and wandering comedians, who brought humor to common folk in much the same way that court jesters entertained nobility. The decline of the court jester tradition came gradually as medieval society evolved toward more formal, bureaucratic structures of governance. The intimate, personal nature of medieval courts gave way to larger, more impersonal administrative systems. Yet the jester's legacy persisted in theater, literature, and popular culture. The archetype of the wise fool, the truth-teller protected by humor, continued to resonate long after the medieval courts that created it had disappeared. Not all medieval entertainers were secular performers. Within the religious communities of medieval Europe, a rich tradition of sacred entertainment developed that paralleled and sometimes intersected with secular traditions. The tradition of sacred song had ancient roots, reaching back to the earliest Christian communities. By the medieval period, monasteries had developed sophisticated musical traditions that served both liturgical and educational purposes. Some religious figures became traveling entertainers in their own right, carrying sacred songs and stories to communities that rarely saw formal clergy. These wandering monks and friars served as bridges between monastic culture and popular entertainment. The development of liturgical drama in the 10th and 11th centuries represented a sophisticated fusion of religious instruction and entertainment. These performances, initially conducted within church buildings, gradually evolved into more elaborate production. Mystery plays and miracle plays brought biblical stories and saints' lives to popular audiences in accessible, entertaining forms. These performances required musical accompaniment, and many featured songs that audiences could learn and sing themselves. The carol tradition emerged from this intersection of sacred and secular entertainment. Originally, carols were dance songs that could be performed in religious or secular contexts, adapting their content to the occasion. Traveling religious entertainers often carried relics, holy images, or religious texts that enhanced their performances. These objects served as both props and devotional aids, lending authority to their religious entertainment. Literative habits, ages, and maintenance. The Franciscan and Dominican orders, established in the 13th century, placed particular emphasis on popular preaching and religious education. Many friars from these orders became skilled entertainers, using songs, stories, and simple dramas to communicate religious teachings. Sacred entertainment often featured participatory elements that broke down the barrier between performer and audience. Congregational singing, responsive prayers, and simple dramatic participation created communal religious experiences. The music theory developed in medieval monasteries influenced secular entertainment as well. Concepts of harmony, rhythm, and musical structure that originated in religious contexts gradually spread to secular performers. Some entertainers moved freely between sacred and secular contexts, adapting their repertoire to their audience. A performer might sing drinking songs in a tavern at night and lead morning prayers in a monastery the next day. The preservation of many medieval songs and stories owes much to religious communities, whose emphasis on literacy and copying ensured that musical traditions were recorded and transmitted to future generations. The influence of sacred entertainment extended far beyond religious communities. Many secular songs borrowed melodies from religious music, and religious themes appeared regularly in secular entertainment, creating a rich cultural cross-pollination. The daily reality of life as a traveling entertainer in medieval Europe was one of constant adaptation, uncertainty, and resilience. Each day brought new challenges, new audiences, and new opportunities to practice their craft. Most traveling entertainers owned very little beyond their instruments and costumes. Everything had to be portable, durable, and replaceable. A minstrel's lute might be their most valuable possession, carefully protected and maintained through all weather and circumstances. The routes followed by traveling entertainers were determined by practical considerations: the locations of markets and fairs, the generosity of particular patrons, the safety of roads, and the rhythm of seasonal celebrations. Accommodations for traveling entertainers varied enormously depending on their success and the communities they visited. A successful performer might be invited to sleep in a noble's hall, while others made do with tavern common rooms or outdoor camps. Weather was a constant concern for traveling entertainers. Rain could ruin instruments, snow could block roads, and extreme heat or cold could make outdoor performances impossible. Successful entertainers learned to read weather signs and plan accordingly. The seasonal rhythm of medieval life dictated much of an entertainer's schedule. Summer brought outdoor festivals and celebrations. Autumn offered harvest celebrations. Winter meant seeking indoor venues or temporary employment, and spring began the cycle anew. Food was often part of an entertainer's payment, making mealtimes opportunities for both sustenance and social connection. Sharing a meal with an audience could lead to invitations for private performances, or recommendations to other potential patrons. Traveling entertainers developed keen skills for reading social situations quickly. They needed to assess an audience's mood, understand local customs and taboos, and adapt their performance accordingly, often within minutes of arrival in a new place. The dangers of travel in medieval Europe were real, but often exaggerated in later accounts. Most entertainers traveled well-known routes during daylight hours, and often journeyed in groups for safety and companionship. Language barriers posed interesting challenges for traveling entertainers. Those who crossed linguistic boundaries needed repertoires that transcended language. Instrumental music, physical comedy, and simple songs with universal themes. The bonds formed between traveling entertainers were often strong and lasting. These relationships provided professional networks, emotional support, and practical assistance in times of need. Many entertainers developed signature styles or specialties that made them memorable to audiences and helped them build reputations. Word of a particularly gifted performer could spread along entertainment networks, creating demand for their services. The economics of traveling entertainment were precarious, but not necessarily impoverished. Successful entertainers could earn substantial sums during peak seasons, though they needed to budget carefully for lean periods. Retirement from the traveling life usually meant either finding permanent employment with a patron or establishing oneself in a particular community. Some former entertainers became music teachers, innkeepers, or maintained themselves through a combination of local performances and other trades. In an age when few people could read and books were precious rarities, the memory of traveling entertainers served as vast libraries of songs, stories, and cultural knowledge. These human repositories preserved and transmitted the musical heritage of medieval Europe. Save Modonio. Extraordinary. The techniques medieval entertainers used to memorize vast repertoires were sophisticated and time-tested. They organized songs by occasion, mood, or musical key, creating mental filing systems that allowed quick access to appropriate material for any situation. Musical training in the medieval period emphasized pattern recognition and formulaic structures. Many songs shared common melodic phrases or chord progressions, allowing performers to adapt and improvise while maintaining familiar frameworks. The oral tradition meant that songs evolved gradually as they passed from performer to performer. Each entertainer might add small embellishments, adapt lyrics to local dialects, or modify melodies to suit their voice or instrument. Traveling entertainers served as crucial links in the chain of cultural transmission. A song created in one region could spread across Europe within a few decades, carried by performers who learned it from each other at markets, fairs, and chance encounters. The seasonal gatherings where entertainers met were important for maintaining and updating their repertoires. These occasions allowed performers to trade songs, learn new techniques, and stay current with changing tastes and fashions. Children often learned musical traditions by following traveling entertainers, picking up songs and techniques through observation and imitation. These informal apprenticeships created new generations of performers, while ensuring the continuity of musical traditions. The relationship between written and oral musical traditions was complex in medieval Europe. While some music was recorded in manuscripts, the majority of entertainment music lived only in the memories of performers, creating a parallel musical culture alongside formal ecclesiastical composition. Regional variations in musical style created distinctive local flavors within the broader European entertainment tradition. A song that originated in England might sound quite different when performed by a German minstrel, reflecting local musical preferences and instrumental techniques. The preservation of historical events in song was another crucial function of traveling entertainers. Battles, political changes, natural disasters, and other significant events were often commemorated in ballads that served as informal historical records. Some entertainers specialized in particular types of musical memory. Epic storytellers might memorize vast narrative poems, while dance musicians focused on the intricate rhythmic patterns needed for various regional dances. The accuracy of musical transmission through oral tradition was remarkably high, despite the lack of written records. Performers took their role as cultural preservers seriously, and communities often corrected entertainers who strayed too far from familiar versions of beloved songs. The emotional power of music made it an ideal vehicle for preserving cultural memory. Songs that told important stories or conveyed essential cultural values were more likely to be remembered and transmitted accurately than purely factual accounts. Instrumental music followed different patterns of preservation and transmission than vocal music. Without lyrics to anchor them, instrumental pieces were more fluid and open to variation, leading to rich traditions of improvisation and adaptation. The decline of purely oral musical tradition began gradually in the later medieval period as literacy increased and musical notation became more widespread. However, the performative traditions established by medieval entertainers continued to influence European music for centuries. The rhythm of medieval life was punctuated by festivals and celebrations that provided crucial opportunities for traveling entertainers. These gatherings brought communities together and created concentrated demand for entertainment that could sustain performers through leaner periods. Religious festivals formed the backbone of the medieval celebration calendar. Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and the feast days of important saints provided occasions when even the most devout communities welcomed entertainment as part of their spiritual observance. Harvest festivals were particularly important for traveling entertainers because they coincided with the time of year when rural communities had both leisure time and disposable income. The successful completion of harvest work created a natural desire for celebration. Wedding celebrations provided another crucial source of income for entertainers. These private festivities often lasted several days and required diverse entertainment, music for dancing, songs for the ceremony, and stories for the extended celebration. Market days and trade fairs created regular opportunities for entertainment in larger towns and cities. These gatherings brought together people from wide geographical areas, creating audiences hungry for news, stories, and songs from distant places. The carnival season, particularly in Catholic regions, provided weeks of sanctioned revelry before the austerity of Lent. These celebrations featured elaborate entertainments, costume performances, and temporary reversals of social order that delighted audiences. May Day celebrations marked the arrival of spring with outdoor festivities that were ideal for traveling entertainers. The tradition of Morris dancing, maypole celebrations, and outdoor concerts provided numerous performance opportunities. Royal and noble celebrations, coronations, births, marriages, and military victories created opportunities for entertainers to perform for the highest levels of society and potentially gain ongoing patronage. Seasonal celebrations often incorporated ancient pre-Christian traditions that had been adapted to fit Christian calendars. These festivals maintained deep connections to agricultural cycles and natural rhythms that resonated with rural audiences. The atmosphere of medieval festivals was distinctly different from modern celebrations. The pace was slower, the scale more intimate, and the relationship between performers and audience much more interactive and personal. Festival performances often required entertainers to adapt their usual repertoires to specific themes or requirements. A Christmas celebration might call for sacred songs, while a harvest festival would favor secular music with themes of abundance and gratitude. The economic impact of festivals on traveling entertainers could be substantial. A successful season of festival performances might provide enough income to sustain a performer through the quieter winter months. Regional variations in festival traditions meant that traveling entertainers needed to understand local customs and preferences. What delighted audiences in one region might be poorly received in another, requiring cultural sensitivity and adaptability. The decline of traditional festival culture came gradually as European society modernized and urbanized. However, many of the entertainment traditions established during the medieval period continued to influence popular culture long after their original contexts had disappeared. The craft of performance in medieval Europe required skills that extended far beyond simple musical ability. Successful entertainers needed to master the subtle arts of reading audiences, adapting to circumstances, and creating emotional connections across social and cultural boundaries. Voice projection and control were essential skills for entertainers who performed in a variety of acoustic environments. A performer might need to sing intimately in a small chamber one night and project to a large outdoor crowd the next day. The use of space was crucial to effective medieval performance. Entertainers learned to work within the physical constraints of their venues, while creating a sense of theatrical space that drew audiences into their presentations. Timing and pacing were perhaps the most sophisticated aspects of medieval entertainment. Master performers developed an intuitive sense of when to pause, when to accelerate, when to repeat, and when to move on to new material. The relationship between performer and audience in medieval entertainment was remarkably interactive. Audiences participated through singing, clapping, calling out responses, and sometimes joining in dances or simple dramatic presentations. Costume and visual presentation played important roles in medieval performance, but they were necessarily simple and portable. A performer's costume needed to suggest character and status while being durable enough for constant travel. The art of improvisation was central to medieval entertainment. Performers needed to adapt to unexpected circumstances, incorporate audience suggestions, and modify their presentations based on immediate feedback. Emotional range was essential for entertainers who might need to shift from comedy to pathos, from sacred music to secular songs within a single performance. This versatility required both technical skill and emotional intelligence. The development of performance skills was a lifelong process. Even experienced entertainers continued to refine their techniques, learn new material, and adapt to changing audience preferences throughout their careers. Memory techniques for performance went beyond simple memorization of songs and stories. Performers needed to remember audience preferences, successful combinations of material, and the subtle cues that indicated when to modify their presentations. The physical demands of performance were considerable, especially for entertainers who incorporated acrobatics, dance, or complex instrumental work into their presentations. Maintaining physical condition was essential for career longevity. Stage presence, the ability to command attention and create connection with an audience, was perhaps the most mysterious and valuable skill a medieval entertainer could possess. Some performers seemed to possess this quality naturally, while others developed it through years of practice. The integration of multiple entertainment skills within a single performance was common in medieval entertainment. A typical evening might include music, storytelling, comedy, and simple acrobatics, all seamlessly woven together. The psychology of performance, understanding how to create and maintain audience engagement, was intuitive knowledge that master entertainers developed through experience. This included knowing when to surprise audiences and when to meet their expectations. As medieval Europe gradually transformed into the Renaissance world, the traditions of traveling entertainers evolved rather than disappeared. The skills, techniques, and cultural functions they had developed found new expressions in changing social contexts. The development of printing in the 15th century began to change the relationship between oral and written traditions. Songs and stories that had lived only in performers' memories could now be preserved in printed collections. Professional theater companies began to emerge in larger cities, offering entertainers opportunities for more stable employment. However, these early theaters maintained many characteristics of medieval performance: intimate audiences, interactive presentations, and diverse entertainment within single shows. The court masque tradition of the Renaissance grew directly from medieval court entertainment, incorporating music, dance, poetry, and elaborate spectacle. Many techniques developed by medieval entertainers found sophisticated expression in these formal productions. Folk music traditions preserved many of the songs and techniques of medieval entertainers in rural communities long after professional entertainment had moved toward more formal structures. Village musicians continued to serve functions similar to those of traveling minstrels. The educational role of entertainers evolved into more formal structures as schools and universities expanded. However, the tradition of using music and storytelling for instruction continued, drawing on techniques developed by medieval performers. Carnival and festival traditions maintained strong connections to medieval entertainment practices, preserving the seasonal rhythms and community functions that had sustained traveling performers for centuries. The rise of professional musicians and composers in the Renaissance built upon foundations laid by medieval entertainers. The skills of improvisation, audience engagement, and musical versatility developed during the Middle Ages informed more formal musical traditions. Literature began to preserve and romanticize the traditions of medieval entertainers, creating literary archetypes that influenced cultural understanding of this period. These literary representations, while not always historically accurate, helped preserve memory of medieval entertainment traditions. The guild system that emerged in later medieval and Renaissance periods provided entertainers with more formal professional structures. Musician guilds, actor companies, and similar organizations offered training, regulation, and mutual support that echoed the informal networks of medieval performers. Regional entertainment traditions that had been shaped by medieval performers continued to influence cultural development well into the modern period. Each area of Europe maintained distinctive characteristics that could be traced back to medieval entertainment practices. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries created renewed interest in medieval culture, including its entertainment traditions. This revival, while often historically inaccurate, helped preserve awareness of medieval performance practices. Modern folk music, traditional dance, and community festival traditions maintain direct connections to medieval entertainment practices. Many techniques, song types, and performance contexts established in the Middle Ages continue to influence contemporary culture. The study of medieval entertainment by modern scholars has revealed the sophistication and cultural importance of these traditions, leading to greater appreciation for the role entertainers played in medieval society. Contemporary performance practices in theater, music, and storytelling continue to draw inspiration from medieval entertainment traditions, particularly the emphasis on audience engagement, improvisation, and the integration of multiple art forms. As our journey through the world of medieval entertainers draws to a close, we find ourselves back where we began, in the quiet spaces between performance and rest, between movement and stillness, where the echoes of ancient songs still whisper in the evening air. These wandering souls who carried joy from place to place have left us more than historical curiosities. They preserved and transmitted the cultural heritage of an entire civilization, creating bonds between communities and keeping alive the human need for story, song, and shared celebration. In their dedication to their craft, their adaptability to changing circumstances, and their commitment to serving others through entertainment, medieval performers embodied values that transcend their historical period. Their legacy reminds us of the essential role that art and entertainment play in the human community. Tonight, as you settle into rest, perhaps you'll hear in the quiet darkness some faint echo of those ancient melodies. The gentle plucking of lute strings, the soft rhythm of a tabor drum, the warm voices raised in songs that once brought communities together under medieval skies. The wandering joy continues in every performance, in every song, in every story that brings people together in shared wonder. Sleep well, fellow travelers, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle music of ages past.